Now I've transferred my drawing and I'm using gouache paint. Okay, so I've got a little bit of paint in the bottom of this glass container, a tiny bit of water there as well, and I'm thinning it just to an ink-like consistency. Okay, so I'll use the bit that I've got there on my brush. I'm not dipping in and out and putting the watery section at the bottom on the drawing paper. Test this out on some paper for yourself. Okay, so you've got the right consistency. Deliberately have a lot of gouache paint and a tiny bit of water. Try to put that on some pastel matte paper and you'll see it doesn't flow well from the brush at all. It can be clumpy and thick, and you know that then is too thick. Now add lots and lots of water, so there's mostly water and just a small amount of paint. Try that on some pastel matte paper, some scrap paper, and what you'll see is the paper kind of sucks the water and the paint from the brush, drags it into the cellulose upper layer of the pastel matte paper, or the fibers. It sucks it in and then it kind of spreads out, so you won't get a nice defined edge. So the place that we want to get to is in between those two. It's not really difficult, there's a lot of leeway in there as well, but if you test it out, and that's really the only way you'll understand it, it's probably around about 50-50 water and gouache paint. But the way gouache comes out of a tube is very thick. Water is obviously water, so it's just almost impossible. But if you get it to like an ink consistency, and the happy medium is that it comes from the brush and doesn't then spread out as it gets sucked into the paper. And as you can see, I can get some quite defined lines. When you've got it pretty accurate, you don't need an expensive brush or anything like this, because remember, all these markings won't show up on the final drawing. I'm doing the gouache for one reason only. And before, let me tell you something. The question then I get asked frequently, can I use acrylics instead of gouache? So let me go over that briefly first. The issue with acrylics, some acrylic paints dry perfectly matte, so they would probably work, they should work. Some acrylics dry and they're really shiny, because acrylic is more like a plastic. Gouache always dries completely matte. It's very similar to watercolor paint. If you haven't got gouache, and I would say just buy a tube of black and a tube of white. That's all I've got. That's the only types I ever use. It's not that expensive and it will last you years. Okay, so it's easy just to get regular Winsor & Newton gouache is the one I use, but there's nothing special about it. Rather than experiment with acrylics and find it doesn't work, or it does work, and acrylic is the same price anyway. An alternative you may well have in your supplies is watercolor paint. The black on watercolor, that should work perfectly fine as well. So why am I even putting the black spots on with gouache paint? Why don't I just use pastel for them? Well, a few years ago I was doing something like this, and I was finding that when I put the markings down like this with pastel, they inevitably end up being smudged, or they dirty the colour in between them. So if you look at the leopard, then you can see we've got all those lovely creamy colours that we want to keep pretty much pure. If I put the blacks on now in pastel, they're going to smudge. So that's the one issue. The next issue is, very often I like to look at the underlayer as kind of like, it's almost like sculpting out of clay. I'm forgetting about the details, the spots, the markings, the highlights, all that. I just want to create something underneath, like a base to work on that looks three-dimensional. Okay, that has the shape and form of the leopard without all the detail. The easiest way to do that on something large like this is by using pan pastels or pastel sticks, but I kind of prefer pan pastels myself. The issue with pan pastels, the tools, if I put these black spots on in pastel again, by doing the pan pastels I'm going to smudge it all, okay, and it's going to be a real mess. So what's the way around it? One way is to work on one tiny area at a time with my pencils. So I'd be leaving a gap for each black spot, getting my black pencil, putting in the black spot, moving down a bit, doing the fur, doing the next black spot. I don't like working like that at all. I come from an oil painting background, so I was always used to being able to put in the underlayer really quickly, just concentrate on the shape and the form. That's the way I like to do it. It's the easiest way, in my opinion. By doing the spots with gouache paint, they dry almost instantly and they're not going to move. Okay, so now you can see the benefit and the reasoning of why I thought of doing this. By putting the spots in with paint, it means I can come in with my pan pastels, as you're going to see very shortly, and just go straight over the top of them. Because pan pastels is not completely opaque, and even the sticks, you know, if you're applying them thin enough, you'll see the spots, these markings, as a kind of a ghosty image, shadowy image through them. It means that I can keep the spots in the right place. They're helping with the shape and the form, but I can concentrate on just getting in the underlayer and go straight over the top of them with pan pastels. So that massively simplifies the whole drawing process, and it means I can rest my hand on top of areas that I've got the gouache on, and it's not going to smudge at all either. Okay, so that's why I use gouache paint, and I think it really helps me to speed up the process as well. And you know me, I like to keep things simple. This is a way of separating each process, so I can think of doing the underdrawing or the line art like it is now first. You can transfer it over using transfer paper. Don't push hard. You can see I've only got a faint line on there, so transfer your drawing or do your drawing on there. Then you can put the gouache on just where the dark black areas are. In this case, that's lots of areas. And then you can concentrate next stage, get the underlayer in, the base right with pan pastels. Then next stage, details on top. So you can see I like to break it down into more simple stages so I don't get overwhelmed trying to think of all of the technicalities and the details and the refinement in one go. Okay, so I hope that's helped to explain why I use gouache and this starting process. Now, as you can imagine, I'm going to be doing this for a while. I've got lots of spots to put in place. I'm not worried about them being super accurate on the shape. Pastel will go on top of it, but I do want them, you know, pretty much in the right position, because as you can see on the reference photo, the spots, the way they are orientated is helping with the shape of the actual leopard. Okay, so I do need to get the positioning fairly accurate. The amount of time this process is going to save is really worth the effort of spending. It took me probably 30 minutes or so to do all the spots. Okay, but that's going to save me a lot of time at the next stages. And you can see this full video and many more, literally hundreds of hours of lessons from complete beginner all the way up to super advanced over on my Patreon art channel. I've got around about 1,400 plus members on there, and I hope to see you there real soon.